Hey there, comrades. So, I said that my next video would be about Bernie Sanders, and that one will be coming out soon, but I need to talk about what's going on right now. And no, I'm not going to talk about ContraPoints. I don't want to talk about ContraPoints. Every fucking conversation has to be about ContraPoints. So I said in my last video that I was optimistic about 2020, so of course that means I jinxed the year, and I owe you all a Coke. Because, as I'm sure you've heard by now, the US just very openly assassinated a high-ranking Iranian military official, Qasem Soleimani, while he was in Iraq. Soleimani was the major general who was in charge of Iran's external operations, and apparently he was very popular both within Iran and the Middle East as a whole. He may even possibly have been a future presidential candidate. This is, and I cannot stress this enough, an act of war. Period. Now, it may be the case that since Soleimani was, at the time, meeting with Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, a figure in Iraq who was allegedly responsible for the recent attack on the U.S. embassy there, that they were actually intending to kill al-Muhandis and didn't know that Soleimani was there, and they just don't want to admit to that kind of geopolitical whoopsie. But I'm skeptical of that idea, and it doesn't fucking matter. Not just because America's activities in the Middle East are horrific and disgusting, no matter who's getting blown up, but because both the Pentagon and Trump have now publicly stated that they intended to kill Soleimani, which means politically it makes no difference whether they actually intended to or not. I don't see how the Iranians respond to this without escalating, honestly. Right now, the jingoists, the Trump sycophants, the mainstream media are all trying to frame this as though we assassinated, say, the head of Al-Qaeda or ISIS or something like that. It is very much not something like that. Soleimani was a very, very popular figure in Iran. To contextualize this for my fellow Americans, imagine if in, say 1949, someone had just dropped a bomb on Dwight Eisenhower. Just 'cause. It's kinda like that. Apparently, according to one poll, 82% of Iranians viewed him favorably, and he was very close, personally, to the Ayatollah Khamenei, who was the supreme leader in Iran, which arguably made him more powerful than Iran's fucking president. This was not just taking out some bad guy in a desert somewhere. This was an act of war against one of the most powerful states in the Middle East. Though, to be clear, it's never just taking out some bad guy in the desert somewhere. What is, by my estimation, far more likely than this being a miscalculation is that this was a deliberate attempt to provoke open war with Iran. The neoconservatives within the Republican Party and some within the Democrats have been chomping at the bit to go to war with Iran for decades. I mean, throughout my entire adult life, hardly a year has gone by in my life without somebody talking about how we should bomb Iran.
Bomb Iran? Bomb. Anyway.
And the motivations for this are pretty clear. When I found out about this, my fiance was over at a friend's house, and her phone was dead. And I kind of freaked out a bit. But, I calmed down. I told myself, the world's not ending. Not yet, at least. And when she got home, and I told her about everything that was going on, she kept asking why. And I kept responding, war. And eventually she got fed up with this and told me, stop saying war, why? In my exasperation, I kind of forgot that my fiance, who is very left-wing, doesn't really have much of an appetite for politics. But that's okay. She approaches these things morally. She's a comrade. It's all cool. It's all valid because she came to the right conclusions. And so I told her. Money. Within minutes after this happened, the stock prices of weapons manufacturers shot up. The shit has already lined many pockets. I would bet my bottom dollar that this is the motivation behind assassinating such a prominent figure of an important country. But admittedly, I probably shouldn't bet against Donald Trump being an idiot. But I'm not. Trump wouldn't approve of this unless he thought it benefited him personally, because that's who Trump is. I think that Donald believes that this will help with his re-election campaign, which isn't an unreasonable assumption. Going to war has helped a number of incumbent presidents, both Republican and Democrat, over the years. But the American people have zero appetite for war right now, especially over someone who they weren't even aware of until we murdered him. A new war in the Middle East will not work out for Donald Trump. He campaigned in 2016 heavily on criticisms of our many wars in that region, not for moral reasons or some strategic assessment, but because he said some shit at his rallies and people reacted to it. He is a maestro of pretending to give the people what they want, and what the people want is an end to foreign intervention. If anything, war with Iran would just open him up to the Democratic candidate being able to thrash him on it, especially if that candidate is Sanders, who has been almost always right about U.S. intervention. No matter which way you slice this, it's almost certainly an asinine move politically, but a beneficial one financially. And morally, it is deeply disgusting, because even if this doesn't result in open warfare, tensions are now going to escalate in that region. More people are going to die, and more children are going to be afraid of blue skies because that's when the drones can see them. All for the express purpose of scoring political points and lining pockets, and that should infuriate anyone who even pretends to have a conscience. But let's move on to another pressing issue. The other day, I watched Gushin's video on the bushfires in Australia. If you haven't watched it, you really should. Go and watch it. I think by and large, people are aware that Australia is on fire right now. 14.7 million acres have burned down so far in Australia. And for comparison, in 2018, wildfires in California burned down about 1 million acres. And I remember that fire season. Some of the ones in Washington actually came pretty close to where I work. And you know, the skies were incredibly hazy. Even inside, everything smelled like a campfire across the entire town. My car was covered in a fine layer of ash at the end of work every day. But it didn't look like this. Seriously, the smoke is choking out New Zealand, and New Zealand is over 2,500 kilometers away. I implore you to watch Gushin's video on the subject, but I am going to repeat what she says here. We need to be talking about this. It's kind of wild that I've hardly heard anything about this when it is, quite frankly, the perfect opportunity to contextualize climate change. One of the largest coal-producing countries in the world is burning to the ground right now. And the opportunity to frame this in an anti-capitalist light, I think, is being kind of squandered. When large swaths of the Amazon rainforest burned last year, we talked about it a lot. I think why this time it's different is that in the case of Brazil, we had a villain we could point to. Bolsonaro, a fascist. It was made part of an anti-fascist narrative, which is good. But climate change is its own deal, and I think we of the online left are missing opportunities by being so focused on the fascists, media critiques, and our own internal disagreements, which is exactly why I'm not talking about ContraPoints. And those things are important. I myself am going to continue to talk about them, but I think it's time to broaden it out a little bit. Climate change is frankly the issue. If we don't address it, well, there won't be any other issues to address. And it's an issue that people really care about. There are entire nations that are going to sink beneath the sea. Seawater is coming up through the streets in Miami. It's here. It's now. It's affecting people's lives. And the fascists have a narrative around climate change that they employ over and over and over again. I mean, it's bad and wrong, but it works as a narrative. It feels like an answer. Climate change, like war, demonstrates through the actions of these energy companies and weapons manufacturers that not only is it okay to simply sacrifice millions of lives, but that sacrifice is actually necessary in order to keep the system functioning. I mean, the world is on fire. The fascists are back. They're the ones who caused this. They knew what they were doing, and we are the ones who are suffering the consequences while they remain unaffected by it. In fact, they just keep making more fucking money. The bottom line with all this is it's time to stop fucking around. If you're supporting any candidate for the presidential race in the US other than Bernie, stop. It's time to get with the program. I realize that putting it that way may turn off some people who are hesitant to support Sanders, but Bernie is a profoundly different candidate, and I'm not going to get into details with that right now. I will be doing videos about Bernie in the future, so look to those. I will explain why you should be supporting Sanders, but the fact remains that you should. From a purely electoral standpoint, he is the best opportunity we have at making real change. But like I said, I'm not going to go into that right now. I will go into it in future videos. And if you're an American, call and/or email your representatives about Iran. Tell them they need to act. Not condemn. Act. They should support Bernie Sanders and Ro Khanna's bill, and make sure they know that if they don't, you will be supporting whoever primaries them in the future. I'm not much for the calling your congressperson thing. I think pretty typically it does fuck all. But in this particular case, the ability to make war is a power that Congress has, not the president. Also, people are very much going to die, so since it doesn't take a whole lot of effort, we should at least try, even if it will be ultimately ineffective. And beyond that, in the realm of not fucking around, it's high time that we stopped relying on the people that we vote for to maybe, hopefully, do some good things and start exercising the power that we have. Join an organization, unionize your workplace, get your neighbors together and do a rent strike. Join the IWW, DSA, whatever. Just do it and actively participate. Push whatever organization you're a part of in a more radical direction. And my God, we are overdue for a general strike. We should have had one over climate change years ago. Speaking of which, in France right now, there is a huge general strike that has been going on for a month over changes to the pension system there. And it is yet another thing that we really should be talking about. Not only is it up to us to talk about these things because the mainstream media is going to talk about it as little as possible, even though it's the longest and largest strike that France has had in decades, and all kinds of things were shut down over the holidays. But we should be talking about it because it's exactly the kind of action that we want to see everywhere. Now, France has a more revolutionary spirit than my country, and a more robust set of labor unions, but we can change those things. And not only that, but we can do these things with what we have. We need only try. There's a famous quote from Mario Savio that I'm sure you've heard already, but I'm gonna say it anyway. There's a time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart, that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all. The world is on fire. The fascists are back. The US is gearing up for war, and the UK just lost its best chance at having a government that actually gives a shit. Make it stop. It's time for all of us, myself included, to stop fucking around.